My opportunity here today is to share some data we have collected in the past few months, some relate to the past year, about how the Israeli audience treats even the simplest terms such as true, false, fake, or whatever. Let's just start with some simple numbers. Israelis are very much addicted to news and opinions, especially on social media. We monitor on a daily basis more than 10,000 different posts regarding news or regarding opinions, which is a very, very large amount of data that we can actually monitor and analyze. And one of the most interesting things about this data is that we can gather more than 5 times more uses of terms such as fake or false than actual phrases like true or you're right or you're correct. And it's interesting because most of the people that claim about something that it's false or fake or whatever other words or terms they are using, uses it in order to express that they disagree with the data, but they're not actually doing something such as reporting or checking or doing anything to actually understand if it's actually false or fake. And that's interesting because Israel, as you all know, is very much addicted to rumors. And whenever there is insufficient data about some matter that is on the news, either because it's forbidden or unknown or not something that is rightful to talk about, then most people would start spreading rumors, some that from reading it you would understand immediately that it's totally imaginary or can't be true. And so we have checked the amount of people that share data without checking if it's true or not, and that numbers comes up to 98% of the shares. 98% of us or 98% of the posts are being shared from people that never had actually checked if it's true or not, and most of the posts that are being shared this way, of course, are false or fake towards other people that claim that. And that's interesting because we share millions of posts that are basically rumors. In Israel, in Hebrew, we say Rav Seren Shmuati, but you know, major rumor.
Trying to translate that, and it's difficult. Yeah, you can't translate it.
And we can find a lot of terms like trust me, I know, or trust me, my cousin, my friend, my brother, or whatever. He's actually there and he knows, or I heard it from someone reliable, and etc., etc. But so many fake opinions are being uploaded and are up there on the social media, and fake news is almost never used for those kind of posts. We use fake news mostly to complain about either the Israeli media or the Israeli governance, either the prime minister or whoever. Actually, almost 70% of the times we use the term fake news, we usually use it about one of the two, either the media, whichever channel or different aspect of the media, both right-wing, then left-wing, then central, and etc., or towards the government, the prime minister, judges, or whoever is in political duty right now to share this thought about. And actually the other 30%, almost half of it, is considered to be fake news from overseas, such as the Trump election, or Arabic newspapers or media channels that are considered to be fake because it's not aligned with our opinion, and so on and so on. So basically, fake news, the actual term, is almost never used for what fake news really is. We never see the use of fake news, for example, we almost never see the use of fake news to actually describe false advertisement or exaggeration with an opinion or something that is actually fake news. And then we try to find deeper, since 70% of users of the fake news is actually people that disagree with an opinion and not actually checking if it's fake or not. And that actually means that basically everything online can be fake news, but can't be fake news. So what makes it fake or not, for the understanding of those users, it's the virality of the engagement of those posts. Meaning, if a post is viral on the internet, then it must be true. If a post is not viral on the internet, and someone claims it's fake, and the claim it's fake gets viral, then it must be false. So basically, we have a whole different term to understand what's fake or not, which is how engaged or how viral things is, which means basically that everyone can manipulate news online in so many different ways. Which brings a more theoretical question is, do we define fake news with the right terms? Or do we do the right things to actually fight, or do we need to fight fake news? But I would leave that to the other panelists to decide.
Well, thank you, Raviv, for your notes. You need to drink now. So it's interesting that you are saying that virality determines actually whether people believe that particular content is... I'm really afraid to say the word fake news because it's such a loaded term. Most of the information are fake news or true. We know that only 5% of the information, and again, those numbers usually vary from one context to another, but usually only 5% is true or fake news. Literally speaking, most of the information, 95%, is somewhere in between. So we have 50 shades of gray. We have different, yes, forgive me for the metaphor, but we have most of the content can be a true one with different interpretations. It depends who says that. It depends what we say. Part of it is misinformation. Some of it is disinformation. The sources sometimes are fake. If it's an account that's fake, does it make the content exactly exaggeration and humor, sarcasm? So we have a whole line of different lines of true, and we have to be careful about that.
Good morning again. It's lovely to be here. I'd like to thank very much for the organizers for the invitation. It is a privilege to be able to be exchanging thoughts and ideas with you from a very different part of the world. I think we do have a lot to exchange. So let's engage in this debate. As I mentioned before, I work for Article 19. Article 19 is a human rights organization, and I mentioned that again. Because I really want to bring to the table the perspective, the point of view from which I'll be talking about fake news and the other issues here today. We now have 9 offices around the world, including one international office in London, and most of our work is based on policy and legal work. So we build these policies with the participation of the regional offices. We do a lot of consultations in different regions of the world, and we bring together these pieces, these documents that are used for standard setting at the international level, but then we bring it back to the ground and we use these documents a lot for litigation, for advocacy at the national level. And we also do a lot of capacity building and campaigning, just to relate a little bit to your presentation, Efrat, so the type of work that we do. And we have been doing activism in freedom of expression and information for the past 30 years. So it was born as a freedom of expression and information organization. Our DNA is there, but currently we have been dealing more and more with digital rights issues. And I wanted to make a point that actually this work on digital rights is born from a need that we feel from the work in the other areas. So actually, for example, we always worked on the right to protest as part of the right to freedom of expression and assembly. And then suddenly we started to receive a number of cases of surveillance, also surveillance of protesters. And then we need to build on this new area of our work. We work for many years on the protection of journalists, especially women journalists in Brazil, for example. And then by doing consultations with them, we realized that the main type of violation that women journalists face in Brazil is gender-based violence online. We work with human rights organizations on their exercise of freedom of expression, and we realized that now they need to look into digital security issues. A number of organizations were being hacked and had problems of losing monitoring data on cases. And that got us to the discussion about anonymity and how it is today a requirement, actually, for the exercise of free expression in a number of different regions of the world. And we have been working with legacy traditional media on content regulation for quite a while. And now if you look at the new discussions, when we talk about moderation of online content, again, we are bringing to the digital area discussions that in which we have been engaging for many years, and that led us to a new type of approach, or a new thinking about old rights, as we were talking during the introduction to this conference. And especially this last one, the moderation of online content, takes me to fake news. And then when I was first invited to the panel, I had like 3 key questions that popped to my mind when I saw the topic to be discussed. And all this presentation this introduction is to give you a little bit of from which point of view I'll be trying to not answer these questions, but raise some issues in relation, or brainstorm about these 3 questions. And the 3 questions would be: what is this? What is fake news? What is the impact of fake news? And what should we do about it from the standpoint of an organization that is promoting freedom of expression and information? So, general points, the brainstorming about what is fake news, and some of it was already discussed here today. First, that in general, like if we think of misleading news and propaganda, this is not a new phenomenon. It's something that has been there since press was created. And at some points in history, we have like a boom, like this becomes a trend topic. And a recent research shows, for example, that fake news was something that was really discussed during the era of World War II, because there was a lot of impact on propaganda war. So at that point, there was a lot of discussion about this topic. And of course, right now, given the impact of technology and the type of business model that we have for social media, of course we have a significant dimension to this phenomenon, but I would like to mention again that it's not a phenomenon that is new. I just came from Argentina the other day, and someone was telling me, oh, I see La Nación, that is the main newspaper in the country, publishing fake news every day. So actually, like, maybe it's not only related to the digital context and how we look at it. It's important. The second point is how we define it, because actually I don't think we have a definition of fake news. Of course, we have been saying that maybe we shouldn't even use this term fake news, but the bottom line is that what is exactly this phenomenon? What are the boundaries? What are the different types of actions, of activities that are encompassed by fake news? So we have talked about misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, but even in relation to intent, if there is an intention to spread wrong or misleading information, what happens with the person that replicates thinking that it's a true news? Is that fake news as well? So I think we have a huge problem with the definition, what we mean by fake news, how broad it is, how far we go, and then that creates a problem, because of course if we are not clear about what we are talking about, how do we face it, and what are the key strategies, and how we design clear-cut strategies to address it. And I would argue that in general, fake news, therefore, given this ambiguity, could not be the basis for action or for strategic action, and mainly it could not be the basis for legal action. It's not clear enough, it's not concrete enough. And I'm not saying there are not legitimate goals behind it. There are, and many times, for example, you see the idea of combating fake news because you want to protect electoral processes, or you see initiatives trying to combat, restrict fake news because there's concern about protecting the public order. So sometimes there is a legitimate legitimate goal behind it, but therefore, maybe we should aim at these specific goals and not really try to curtail fake news as general or limit fake news as general. And my last point in relation to what is fake news is actually a point that was made before, that it has been captured by less than democratic governments, especially those that want to delegitimize the role of media, especially when media is spreading information that is controversial, that is not very comfortable for the government. A number of governments are trying to use this discourse of fake news to silence, or the idea of controlling fake news to silence oppositional views. And we already have examples, very concrete examples. In Ecuador, for example, a journalist was jailed for disseminating untrue information about the rising prices of goods. So this is already out there, and we should be careful about it. And I go to my second question. So what is the impact of fake news? And I think from an organization that is protecting freedom of information, we would say that it's really worrisome that this could undermine democratic societies, because we work on the premise that people they behave as political actors based on information, building their visions and ideas of the world based on information that is coming from a plural and diverse sources. That's how they create their views, and then how they express politically. And fake news, of course, could have a huge impact on that premise. But the first thing that I would say is that maybe that premise is really true for very limited spaces in the world. I would say, like, for example, I'll keep using examples from my own region, but in Latin America, lack of true public media, fragile community systems, and concentrated and biased private media has already affected this context, even when we talk about legacy media. So, so going further away, when we talk about the impact of fake news, I think we also mentioned here before the reach of fake news. How fake news, there are some studies that show that they are retweeted much more than real news. Or in relation to the 2016 presidential election in the U.S., that it had a very broad reach, maybe broader reach than other news. But my point would be, how, and we have had other studies currently that show that maybe we should go beyond and not only look at the reach of particular pieces of news, but actually the impact and the influence that these news have. So these fake news, are they really changing people's minds on specific topics? So have we gone further away and actually research that specific impact, the actual influence that they have? And there are some studies at this point, including a recent 2018 study by the Oxford University Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, saying that maybe that's not the case. Maybe the reach is considerable, but maybe it's not influencing people as much as we thought. So I would say that we need to stop and think and look at the past and the history of fake news, even beyond the digital sphere, and then look at the digital sphere and try to understand really the impact before trying to address these phenomena. And then I get to the third and final question, that is what we should do about it. And again, here I'm not trying to bring solutions, but really just to brainstorm about things that we have been discussing among civil society organizations. And the first is that we really should resist to the regulatory impetus, because we have been seeing that a lot in many parts of the world, very quickly to run to regulatory schemes. And what we see is that most of these schemes are very open to abuse. So there's a lot of risk there. As I was telling you before, so many times there is a legitimate goal behind the idea of controlling fake news, and maybe there's already legislation protecting these specific areas. So existing normative maybe would cover a number of the issues in relation to which we are concerned, and in relation to the ones that are not covered, maybe we should learn more about the impact and go slowly into this idea of regulating, especially having regulation coming from the state, because what we have seen in a number of cases, I will mention the case of Malaysia, for example, is the passing of legislation that is really, really restrictive, that will lead to censorship and that will lead to surveillance. Another idea would be to actually promote diverse, plural, and independent communications, so improve the context of media so that there is a plurality out there and people could look and could find information from different sources. And hold states accountable for their obligation in creating this type of communication context that is conducive to freedom of expression. Promote media ethics, promote media literacy and digital literacy. Also empower fact-checking organizations. And the final point would be to reaffirm the need to account for accountability of online platforms. So we should not be passing on the solution of this problem. We don't have clear-cut solutions at this point, but we should be careful in trying to pass a lot of these responsibilities to the platforms. They should not be the owners of the truth. They should not be the ones deciding on what is the truth. They should be held accountable, and maybe a way of doing that is to create self-regulatory schemes that are actually multi-stakeholder and that are open to participation by different actors. There are guided by principles of independency, of transparency, and this again is just a suggestion of the way to go. We know that there has been, some of the platforms have been putting some other schemes in place, but it's still like a trial and error exercise. So we still need to see how the impact of them, the effectiveness of them. But as another idea, I would say that these self-regulatory schemes is something that we should also take attention and try to look at what we have there in terms of successful experiences. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paula. Anat, in the meantime, while I introduce you and give some more information, maybe you should put... so before Anat prepares her slides, I would like to put your attention to a new research that was done by a colleague of mine, Sinan Aral, and others, Deb Roy and Vosogi, and it was published in Nature, and they looked at different types of fake news, and you're right, and they showed very nicely, quantitatively, how fake news spreads much faster, farther, deeper, whoever knows a little bit of network analysis, and broader. And so it's a lot more on each one of the dimensions, so it's very interesting. Let me introduce you with Anat Ben David is a senior lecturer at the long title Department of Sociology, Political Science and Communication, and the head of the Open Media and Information Lab at the Open University of Israel. Anat.
Approach this from a slightly different perspective, and I'd like to focus a little bit about online sources as digital facts, and also to raise some concerns about future historians looking back at today and trying to making sense of the online sources that we have today, because these are the primary sources of the future historians, and there are serious questions concerning what is a fact and what is fake, and and who is in charge of keeping and maintaining our digital histories, which is a quite different perspective from I think the work that you're doing on preserving personal digital memories, so collective digital memories. So two iconic images from the past months or so, I think really encompass questions of what constitutes a document and truth in the digital era. And on the one hand, we have the Iranian atomic archive captured heroically by the Israeli Mossad and brought over to Israel, and with the Prime Minister boasting about the state power being able to get hold of a national archive. And on the other hand, we have Mr. Zuckerberg at the hearing at the Congress as the gatekeeper or the key holder of documents and information, or basically the global archive of every bit of information about most of the world's population. And the question is whether digital sources have some hope when these are the main gatekeepers to preserving our collective digital histories. And unlike what people think, the information on the web is not always there. We have this notion that we don't need to save any information because we can just Google it. But looking back at the web, it turns out that the average lifespan of a website is only 18 months. So this notion of continuity, this notion of this collective memory being continuously accumulated on the web is actually misleading. So for example, 7 years ago, in 2011, there was a huge social protest all over the country, which was mainly hailed as a digital protest, as a protest that was mainly organized through social media and the web. Its main website was j14.org.il. This website is no longer online. Future historians of our time who would want to go back to this canonical moment in our social history would have zero evidence to what happened, at least in terms of primary sources, publicly available. I'd just like to very briefly introduce two paradoxes that relate to the ontological status of digital history and digital facts. And the first concerns the tension between evidence and erasure. Evidence versus erasure, where on the one hand, web data is used as evidence to prove that things have happened. For example, with the Malaysian airplane and the case with Russia, it was one blogger who boasted that it was a Russian responsibility. That boasting was archived by the Internet Archive, and even though Russia denied, this archival capture was used as evidence to prove some Russian linkage to the event. And on the other hand, information on the web can be so easily deleted that the very status of things as evidence, if they are deleted, they're gone and you can't use them as evidence anymore, as was the case of this organization called Politwoops that documented and monitored politicians' tweets and deleted ones until Twitter cut their access to API. So once someone deletes a tweet, it's gone forever, and so the accountability and responsibility for things that did happen online but leave no trace, unlike what we think. The second tension is found, I guess, with this contradicting perceptions of the information being there forever, as it as the debate about the right to be forgotten is encapsulating, and versus web decay. And with the right to be forgotten, I guess even from regulatory and legal points of view, the notion is that information about people is there and it's there to stay forever, and we have the right to remove that information to protect our digital rights. But on the other hand, if you look at the phenomenon called web decay, as I mentioned before, with the very short lifespan of websites, data is being so quickly erased. And a recent study at Harvard University had shown that about 50% of URLs linked to from Supreme Court decisions are no longer available. So what do we do with that type of evidence being so quickly erased? while we're so busy at protesting Google to remove our private information from websites, thinking that it will stay there forever. So in between these two paradoxes, we can say that this debate about fake data or fake news or fake online content is never new. It has always been there. From these iconic APA guides on how to cite emails or World Wide Web sources that they cannot be trusted, to debates about Wikipedia and whether or not they can be as reliable as real encyclopedias. But it seems that since the last 2016 elections in the US, the debate is returning to us. And much, I guess, of the debate has to do with those who keep our data. So corporate commercial platforms who are held responsible for the spread of this kind of information. And the question remains is what can we do about it, and whether or not there is something that can be done about it. Last week there was a conference here in Israel talking about the severe problem of lack of access to public archives, national archives, where it was argued that 95% of Israel's various archives are inaccessible to the public, even though they are public institutions and digital. Compared to the social media platforms, who may be held accountable to some of the fake phenomena we're witnessing, there are still two dinosaurs of the internet that still harbor the ethos of reliability and free and universal access to all knowledge, and these are the Internet Archive and Wikipedia. And what I'd like to argue is that these two institutions are still our hope for establishing reliable historical facts. So in a sense, both Wikipedia and the Internet Archives are transparent archives, with Wikipedia because every edit can be viewed through the entry's history, and with the Internet Archive, with the ability to just view every snapshot that the bots and crawlers of the Wayback Machine have visited throughout the web's history. So in a sense, this could be a reliable record of our time, but it's not just another platform deciding which content to preserve and which not, as would other national libraries would do with their own web archives, because the Wayback Machine is a collective memory institution where everyone can propose a document for archiving. Imagine people in countries with internet censorship being unable to view certain sources, then using the Internet Archive to see them, other people in other countries purposefully archiving content that they know is sensitive or know that this content could be deleted by other actors who do not wish that content to be there. And going back to the 1911 protests, so just to show that there's still hope, very partially, but the Internet Archive has snapshots of the J14 website. But the point I'd like to wish here is that the measure of transparency, what makes these archives reliable and these digital sources reliable as primary sources, is the very fact that you could see who contributed the snapshot to the archive. And in this case, what you could see is that, in a sense, there is a reification of knowledge devices that are based on crowdsourced knowledge. So a lot of the information that is archived on the Wayback Machine are actually outlinks from Wikipedia, that people contributed to Wikipedia entries, then the Wayback Machine grabs them and preserves them for eternity. So in a sense, this is my view on how collective action can contribute to promoting digital rights in terms of collective memory. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. What I suggest now is, if I'm taking the 15 minutes of introduction, that means that we have... Fantastic, which means that I'll take 15 minutes of discussion and then we'll open it to the floor. I have few kind of things that I think will be challenging to all of us, so let's start. When I'm thinking about collective memory, and this goes back a little bit to what you've said, I'm really asking myself what's the impact of the manipulation in the feed of the fake news to the collective memory. And I like to all the time show the image of what happened in Protective Edge in 2014 here in Israel, when if you looked at the social media, it's not really about what you captured, because we did capture things, but you saw a very different narrative that captured a narrative of truth, that captured actually the social media ecosystem, which was the Palestinian narrative. And you couldn't see at all the Israeli narrative. It was way, way down there, because a lot of people from all over the world kept on tweeting and posting and sharing. And so actually, when you look at the numbers and you're creating, you could see only almost the Palestinian narrative versus the Israeli. And I'm not trying to reconcile or try to define what is true and what is not true. But I'm asking myself regarding collective actions, regarding movements, what is the meaning to collective memory when we have such a problematic feed, when we have such manipulation on the one hand, on the second hand, we don't preserve everything, which is actually, it creates a more strong, I would say, disorientation or inequality. And on the other hand, we know that fake news spreads fast, far, deep, and wide. I said it, all the four. Are you hinting that the Palestinian narrative is a news that spreads? No. That's exactly what I said. I don't want to actually say what is a narrative of truth, exactly because I'm saying it's different narratives of the same story. But what's interesting is that in the example that I gave, you couldn't see actually the Israeli narrative in this case. So in this case, I'm not trying to define which is true and which is, I won't get there. Please don't get me there. So that's the first question. If somebody would like to answer, think, and if it's a very difficult one, I don't have an answer actually to. Nick, I don't have an answer. Yeah. You want to try?
Maybe. Not sure I'm going to be very coherent, but we are in the midst of an epistemological crisis, well, at least the way I see it, because with algorithmic mediation, we lack the checks and balances to allow us to know what is going on behind the scene, who is driving information, whether or not this is authentic or organized, and so on. So I would like to propose the logic of archiving and preservation as a counter movement to algorithmic mediation of content. So if we kind of take back or try to take back some control over the control of platforms on the mediation of information, we, the public, researchers, activists, journalists, anyone who cares about public data and knowledge, because we have a problem of trust. Everything is mediated to us in numbers that you monitor and rely on, but can we trust in these numbers? I assume from stuff that you've done in the past that we can start questioning whether or not the numbers that are given to us by these platforms reflect any kind of truth. So we can go back and deconstruct almost everything, not just the discourse and the actors behind people who spread information, but also the platforms themselves and the metrics that they give us as truth and knowledge. So I would propose auditing algorithms, preserving data, analyzing data from a critical perspective as a counter practice to a crisis of knowledge.
We had a lot of this debate when we had the Spanish decision. We started to discuss in Latin America that maybe, given the historical past and the right to truth and all the information about the dictatorship period and how we had a number of amnesty laws that came after the end of the dictatorship, so there was not really persecution of a number of people that were torturers during that time. So given this historical context, we really debated a lot what we should do, if this de-indexation was a solution or not. And I would just agree with you. I think preserving and transparency, having a lot of transparency on how trends are created, how things are managed, and not deleting things, not deleting specific discourses, and because there's no one true. Actually, there are different narratives, and they should all be there. And it's actually about letting people understand the flow of information instead of bringing it down.
There is no one truth, but there is more powerful stakeholders that hold a particular truth, and you hear it more strongly. And actually, you mentioned Wikipedia, a disclosure. I'm on the board of Wikimedia Israel. Wikimedia is a great project. However, it is very not neutral. We have to understand that. I mean, most of the things that we see on Wikipedia have a lot of power struggles behind the scenes, where all the powerful actors are put forward with their arguments. So we have to remember that. That's
evident, I would say, is part of the...
I wish disclosure, something for the ISOC.
So, just in terms of the media regulation that we have in general, there's already liability for that. So I'm not saying that there shouldn't be liability, but we also have to be careful about this differentiation. It's not always clear, the difference between fact and opinions. So I think that's also something that we have to bring to the table. And there could be liability after, how do you say that? Not prior censorship, but actually liability given
I have to say that when I thought about what kind of question can you put about fake news and collective action, one of the things that kept on coming to my mind, maybe because of Doron is sitting here quietly, is like, no, don't mention me, please, don't out me. But part of the question that is coming is because our experience as activists, it was on the biometric database, about how fake news was used against us, against civil society, and against the activists in the digital realm by different stakeholders. In that case, it was government officials, it was PR officials, and it was also, I would say, capital stakeholders, people who hold, the money, the capital, and I'm wondering, when I'm thinking about my experience, is what is the meaning of fake news in terms of the civil society and activists, and what's the impact on the very delicate relationship between government, civil society? I say civil society, for me, put it as a big word of the activism. It can be also academia. But the very delicate relationship, what's the impact on the delicate relationship between government, citizens, civil society, and industry? And I put in industry platforms as well, like Google and Facebook and other big giants. If anybody would like to comment about that. It's difficult questions. It's like I don't have answers to. Anybody? They're like, we have to think about it.
It has been used as a tool. I was thinking about, we have a number of cases in Venezuela. We had as well in Brazil. We have a very polarized environment right now. We are in the runoff to elections. In 2018, we have presidential elections. The former president was impeached. We have a very, very polarized, and anyone trying to get involved in the political debate is being labeled, and fake news has been used for that. So they want to put people in the different two boxes and create disintegration within society, and you can see that there are a number of forces trying to do that, a number of bots, a number of groups, and sometimes you can even identify where this is coming from. So yes, it has been coming also as a new form of attack to civil society. But I would stick with those solutions.
Believing in truth is a very secular perspective, and I think that most of the people of the world today are not secular. So they want to believe in, basically they want to believe in fake news in some aspects. So I was asking myself what are the mechanisms that we have to give in order to give this truth. But I think that in most of the cases, people do not want to listen to the truth. And this is, you see in the elections, in the Trump campaign, and you see it everywhere. So this is a major question, whether we are just fighting something which is far away from what the general public wants.
Yes, definitely. Before I open the floor for discussion, I want to challenge you with another one. Ready? Okay, so now I'm thinking about using of disinformation by collective action. So the idea of, like we saw in Europe very strongly regarding immigration. So portraying, for example, immigrants as pedophiles, as rapers, as people who would come and capture our work, and people who will destroy the country from within. So the idea is taking actually this information as the tool of collective action. Now I'm switching for a second the hat. And I'm asking myself, what's the impact of collective on this side, this part of activity on collective action, on social movements? Are the fact that we are using tools of disinformation is in the general, very general world. So part of the collective actions are using the disinformation as a tool. Let's be frank. Does that actually hurt other types of collective action? Especially, I'm talking about digital rights, because most of the information is spread online. Most of the information is not spread by a pigeon or a newspaper, or something that a brochure that is put under your door. So we are talking about digital means, and we are talking about digital content being used by collective action. And the question, what's the impact for all collective actions about that? I have difficult questions today, I'm telling you. I work like I was driving from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. I had time to think. It's a problem. Ideas? Is it too difficult? I know, I'm sorry. But the truth is that for whoever is an activist, we ask ourselves those questions every day, and it's not easy.
Isn't it a question of ethics?
Maybe. Would you like to comment on that?
I would assume that if you advocate for digital rights, you would also work within the boundaries of what you consider as digital ethics. So, although perhaps it is best to fight code with code and to fight hacking with hacking. Maybe not all means do service to the cause. So if you are promoting digital rights because you believe in certain values and you use means that counter these values, then there are ethical questions concerned here, and maybe I guess I wouldn't do that. But
Raviv, anything? Okay. My questions are too challenging for the morning. Let's open the floor for questions and let's have a discussion in the room. If you are having a question, please use the mic. So Dorit and I can't see. I'm against the light. I see a black face. Okay, fantastic. So all the three of you. So go ahead and use the mic, please.
Two things I'd like to say. The first is that fake news, in my opinion, is just part of the problem. They can be fake reviews in Amazon. They can be fake talkbacks and comments by people hired by politicians, for example. And the next problem is fake identities. If you have people on Facebook who are fake, not real people, and they may ask for friendship, or they may express their opinions. They may not be true, authentic people, and this is just, in my opinion, just the beginning of the problem. Because in the future, this may be also automatic. If you have artificial intelligence, then these personas can operate without limits of the human reality. The second thing is that fake can be of a single person, but it can also be a fake crowd. People can buy likes, and they can give the impression of public opinion which is not true. They can buy. So the problem is much wider than just fake news, in my opinion.
Dorit.
I didn't hear much about law, about liability, about accountability.
Of whom can you rephrase it? Of whom?
Of whom? That's my question. Because if someone says something, a lie about me, I can sue him. But maybe there should be some sort of a way for, I would say, society to sue. Because if the Prime Minister says a day before the elections or the day of the elections that all the Arabs are going by buses to the polls.
Someone particular?
No.
An imaginary
He's not held accountable for this. Can't anybody do anything about it?
There is no law against lying.
Okay.
We have to say it up front, and I think this is where it comes to the problem, and putting it with the epistemic crisis, that I really like this phrase of the postmodern epistemic crisis, if you want to add another word. It's a problem. I mean, there is a slander, of course, and we have, where is Jonathan? Where is Jonathan? Jonathan can tell you about slander laws. But there is no law about lying. If I'm saying right now that there is a night outside and you all believe me, it's your problem.
Yes, but if you're saying a lie about me, I can sue you.
Yes, if it's a slander, definitely. But those are laws that exist without connection to the internet. Obviously, the internet has a different application. If a lot of people saw this email, this post, obviously there is a bigger range of damage, which puts it on a different scale. But that's a. I think you wanted to say something, and then Doron, and then we'll. The right side of the table right now is very quiet.
So I have a number of
I couldn't
points
see him. Oh, it's Tal.
that
Okay.
I want to raise. And I'll start with where Dorit left, with the point that Dorit left. If only we had facts-checking task force, right? It's not about going to court and suing somebody, it's just finding the right facts. Now, we have that. It's called journalism.
Oh.
And the problem is that journalists are today unqualified to fulfill this task. Most of them work with PR messages that they just copy and paste, and they never check it, and they never look into it, and they never find or try to contradict or challenge the information that they get. And that's the main problem. We had several examples of this in Israel recently. And one of them was kind of an investigative journalism by a citizen journalist, Ishton, that after like months of misinformation about the number of illegal Eritrean and Sudanese in the University of Tel Aviv, just went and did a simple task of looking at the information that he got from officials in the government. And then he saw that the journalists did not follow all the information they got. So what we need is just journalists who actually know their job. So
knowing their job or able to do their job.
Yes.
It's two different types of things.
And some of us here teach in media and communication and journalism schools, and I think that's kind of the mission that we have to contribute to. So I'll just add another point about search engine automatic completion, which is another kind of technological mechanism that can generate false or fake news or misinformation. So only if a large number of people just search for the wrong information, it becomes, in a way, a fact. And that's another aspect which is kind of about the reliability of the technology about in generating information.
Thank you. Thank you. Just a second, Neely. Doron, can you help me passing? Do you have a mic closer? Okay, fantastic.
Grab this one. Yeah, well, I'll switch off. Yeah, it also doesn't stick, but whatever. Thank you. Hi again. I'm Doron, and I'm not on Facebook. So I want to challenge a little bit.
You think you're not on Facebook. If I took a picture, you are on Facebook.
Well, try that. We'll see what the consequences will be. I want to push on some points that Nick had made earlier, and actually it connects to what the last person has said. I think we're kind of evading the bigger, when we talk about fake news, we're kind of evading the bigger, like elephant in the room, like what is news and what is truth, actually. And you kind of touch that. You hear me? And I think you alluded to the fact that the truth would be supported by like a democratic news organization that has like well-known processes and something that we have known to trust. And I'm not sure everyone would agree that, Fox News, Haaretz, The Independent, different people would have different views about those organizations that are like well established and whatnot, bringing out truth. Is that actually the truth? So, and Anat also alluded to some checks and balances that might, enter into the game. But what are these checks and balances? These are some things that we used to kind of trust in the past. Well, some of us did, and they're becoming less and less relevant these days. And I think we're looking at a bigger problem. And it's a bigger question. I don't have an answer. I have, like everyone here, I have many questions about it. But I think that the notion of democratizing information inevitably leads to democratizing the notion of truth. A kind of and not in a good way, like democratizing in a way that the majority rules, not the real definition of democracy. And I don't know that there's a way out. I think many people believe the notion of crowd-based truth, but I think that this notion fails, and it keeps failing us, more and more and more. Because if you judge truthfulness by popularity, that's a very, iffy way to try to go. And I had a sign in an office that I was sitting in, and which read, 100 billion flies can't go wrong, eat crap. And it's a little bit like that, it's if you start judging by the number of likes and popularity, then the notion of truth become even more and more and more evasive. I don't know that there's even an answer to that, but we need to take a close look at what truth is. The only people that have a full answer to that deal with religion. Outside of religion, I don't know that there's even an answer to what truth is. This was a kind of a small problem for philosophers in the past. Currently, it's for all of us.
Yeah. Yuval, just a second. Neely, and then Yuval. Neely Steinfeld.
Thank you. So 2 quick notes that I thought about. First of all, with regards to what Tal said before, so the basic truth is that journalism takes time, and we don't have time in social media era. So journalists, I'm not saying that it's a good thing, but obviously the bigger problem is that if you go around checking facts, then it's already widespread, and then it has no worth. That's a very big problem. And another thing, fun fact that I just found out just a few weeks ago. When you look at the Trump-Hillary media parade in the States in 2016. So most of the websites, about 140 websites that distributed fake news about Hillary, like right-wing facts about Hillary trading with children and stuff like that. They originated in a small village in Estonia or something. Yeah. So these are like 13, 14-year-old kids who learned how to build websites. And there's this guy, and he just taught them. He had a course how to make money out of clickbaits. Seriously. So they just distributed fake news. They have no idea who Trump is. They don't have any political gain or any political theme or motivation. Yeah. They just do it for clickbaits, for fun or for money. So when we talk about fake news, we're thinking about big forces trying to drive some serious some aims, and in many cases that's not the case. And you talked about trying to find out what fake is and trying to talk about intentions. We need to know that too. That it's in many cases there's no driving force there. There's just 13-year-old kids building websites.
Thank you, Mike, and then Yuval.
Yes, thank you. I do think there's an important distinction to be made here between media bias and fake news. A lot of what we're talking about is actually just media bias, and that has to do with omitting facts or infusing events with your perspective, your opinion. Fake news is different, and that's like when you, for example, a few years ago on the anniversary of 9/11, there was a disinformation campaign on Facebook. Fake videos were taken of a terrorist attack that supposedly happened on a chemical facility in a little town in the middle of America. It didn't actually happen. There were a bunch of fake, bots that talked about it happening with fake videos. That's fake news. Those events didn't actually happen. Grander narratives about truth, that sort of thing, infused with opinion, that's more about media bias. I do think there is a kind of truth in basic reporting, certainly. Whether or not somebody got elected is a truth or not. Whether or not people met on one day, or there was a war or not. Those are truths, basic stuff. It's not, reality is not completely
That's true, but
relative.
in America, when you have the fact checker website, which is pretty great because it shows like what politicians said and what are the facts. Nobody cares about that.
Yeah, so that is true, unfortunately. The strength of fact checkers, matters so much. And I think fake news is an old concept, but it's coming back in a more powerful way, and that's because of the disassociation of news from sources that used to be more verifiable. So if you look back, the history of humanity, you used to have rumors, basically, and you had very biased news organizations that started to evolve. A whole tradition in the earliest 20th century of sort of professional journalism kind of came with this ideal, really, of objectivity and reporting the facts and that sort of thing. You had all these different institutions that sort of grew up out of that, all different kinds of media. Perhaps that was always kind of an ideal that we never get to, that sort of objectivity. It's impossible, almost. But it is something that we strive to get to. And I think we've gotten to it, or close to at certain times. But now we're getting away from that. And I think the reason why is just because of the news is online now. It used to be a lot harder to, if there was fake news, if there was, it had to come in a newspaper that somebody made. Not anybody could do that. Not 13-year-old kids in Macedonia couldn't easily do that and distribute it in America. It's different now. So the sort of authenticity of sources is now, I see it as the biggest problem. It's hard to verify where they come from, and so especially when even when the internet first came along, people would go to the actual websites of news sources, and those were even a little bit more verifiable. But now those have been disassociated and are being aggregated on to news feeds and social media in particular, and going to these weird websites. And meanwhile, you have a whole generation of younger people who never really grew up with the concept of reading a real newspaper, which may or may not be biased, or certainly is in its own way. But now suddenly it's like, oh, well, the New York Times is the same as this weird website I've never seen, but that's all I've ever known. They're all the same. So therefore, that's sort of the crisis of, I see as a crisis of just verifying the source. And I don't think it's hopeless, although it is a growing problem, certainly. I think it's something we're all reckoning with, and we're hopefully starting to identify that the danger of it all. And so hopefully we're smart enough to figure out a way to verify these sources again. And that has something to do with fact checkers and being able to rely on them, and all agree on a fact checker. That's not seen as, because they are still, Washington Post's fact checker or some other, fact check. It's like, well, where's one that, can we get one where, Fox News agrees on it too, or we all agree on it? It's a bit idealistic, but there should be some kind of, arbiter that we can all start to trust. Maybe that's what we need. That's the next step.
Civil society?
Yeah.
Yuval, can you pass through the mic? Thank you. Can you raise your hand if you want to talk?
I'm conscious of the time. To me, it sounds like there is a strong case to think seriously about regulation here, because we do have an epistemological crisis, we do have a professional crisis, we do have a market failure, and these are normally the type of situation where you have to think seriously about regulation. And it's true that we do not regulate normally the veracity of information. It's not a crime to lie. It's not even a civil tort unless under very specific guidelines. But we do have a concept of consumer protection. And although this is not you cannot draw the analogy, of course, one-to-one. But I think we have identified area in which there is a public interest in ensuring that there would be a minimal level of misrepresentation, and I think this is an area that needs to be further explored. And I was intrigued by Paula's comment that was open to regulation, but noted that self-regulation is the way forward. And here I think this is a conversation that we should be having, especially in light of the comments we were making in the previous introduction, whether we want the internet service providers to be the one who are setting standards here as to what is the truth and what is false, and what should people think is truth and false. And with all the understandable reluctance and apprehension about governments treading into this, and of course it's not just the Malaysian, it's the the French Parliament is debating this week. Still, I think that there is something to be said in favor of democratic decision making about exactly these sort of issues. So I would be interested to hear further thoughts about whether we have passed the moment of whether we need regulation and should be thinking more seriously about how are we going to go about actually advancing regulation, who should be doing the regulation, what is the role of civil society in pushing for regulation, in shaping regulations. So I would like to perhaps suggest that we try to think about this as well.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, it was my fourth question, but I saw that I challenged them too much today and I passed. I said, okay, I'm not going to put that. Sagit.
Thank you. I'm Sagit.
Sagit, I think you came later, so if you can introduce yourself just with one line.
My name is Sagit. I'm Eshnav chairwoman. Eshnav is an NGO, People for Smart Use in the Internet. We give tools for children and grown people how to use smartly in the internet. I think that there are not only facts, like you said, and opinion. I also think that sometimes facts are blended with opinion, and it's called myths, and myths become narrative, and narrative became a part of our collective memory. And I think that narrative serves politicians, so I don't think the politicians have any interest to make a regulation about it. I believe that there should be some programs to teach media literacy, children and growing up people, to give them tools how to recognize, and I don't think they will never know what is the real truth. As you say, fake news is not new. And I think that people have all kind of practice, usually our intuition practice, how to recognize fake or truth. Most of the time, people believe what stands with their opinion, and I think that we should give them the tools how to do it.
Thank you.
That's what we should promote.
Okay, so how much time do we have?
No, we just have one time for one last speaker. So
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, so who wants to be the last one? Oh my gosh, we have two. We have two competitors. Okay, let's have both of you. Go ahead.
You can take another 10 minutes.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, no worries. Everything is
So
okay.
everybody can.
They're just stressing out everybody.
First of all, I think the education and critical thinking for everyone is very important. But again, coming from computer science and software engineering, one thing that I'm missing in the software engineering education is education for engineers. So an engineer normally is someone who in a sense, protects society from the technology they're working on, right? Like civil engineers. We all trust the civil engineers who calculated and inspected this building to actually do their job correctly, or we find ourselves about, 10 meters above ground surrounded by a few tons of concrete, and that's not a very good situation to be in if they miscalculated, right? So, and in software engineering, we don't have that. And I'm teaching software engineering in Ben Gurion. I don't think there's any ethics class for software engineers. And I think it's not just educating users. Maybe some people at Google or some people at Facebook should have said, this is a nice algorithm. It's very easy to count clicks, but it's very easy to game this kind of algorithm, and we shouldn't really do it. And so I wonder, A, did someone say that? And B, how, obviously it was silenced if someone did. So that's another vector to research.
Yeah. Sharon Khaled-Amir and Paula, you want to talk? And I don't know if one of the people of the panel wants. Sharon,
okay.
Use the mic.
Just referring to your last comment, there are people who said such things, but they were kicked off Facebook and Google because the board did not come to meet their criticism. So anyone wanting to hear them, it's only outside of these
It's not completely true, because just last week Google had changed their policy on using AI with the military industry following protests by Google employees. So there is still hope for that.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the invitation again. This is a really fruitful and important discussion. I just want to relate to the point about Google. From within the company, I can say that there's a lot of ethical thinking actually around algorithmic processes and around making the right call, and not just making an algorithm that would generate the most clicks. So there are misconceptions about it, and there's always thinking about how to improve our ethics practices. The AI principles that were published last week is an example of that. But there are huge teams that do exactly that, thinking about ethical issues, and we're happy to engage in an ethical discussion, hear other opinions, and promote those concepts which are important to us as a company as well. So if there are any pointers or ideas, or you would like to engage, we're very open and happy to discuss, and maybe debunk some notions that were heard around the table about from my perspective at least, it seems that the company has an inherent care for and sees the value in a responsible internet and responsible algorithms, which unfortunately doesn't always come across. But I'd be happy to also speak offline and try to answer factual questions about how we operate.
Sure.
Okay, so I would like to refer to Anat's talk, and I would say that the problem with the two archives that she presented, both Internet Archive and Wikipedia, is that they are not formal institutions. So if for some reason, for example, economic reason, they will stop harvesting the sphere, the online sphere, then we're doomed. But the bigger problem no one spoke about is that formal or official institutional archives deleted their archives, and a great example of this is the climate change archive of the US government. And when the Obama administration went off and Trump said he would delete it all, and it was rescued only by collective action when activists and universities they have archived it all in a few days. And unless they would have done this, it would have all gone lost. So it's a problem, because if the state itself will delete our archives, then it's much a bigger problem, and we could be facing it's as Sagit said, we will be dealing with myths that the governance would like us to have, and not necessarily truth. Yeah. So that's it.
Yeah, I just wanted to react to some of the comments. When I was talking about regulation, I am indeed afraid of regulation, specifically on fake news. But I do think that it's important to remember that there is illegal discourse out there. There is already regulation making some discourse illegal. For example, hate speech. You have the protection of reputation. You have the protection of children's rights. So my point was, maybe we should expand and improve those regulations instead of creating a new regulation specifically on fake news, since it's such a blurred thing. And then on fact checkers, just remembering there's an association of fact checkers that's putting together some principles. So I think it's quite an interesting initiative in terms of collective activism, but it's important to look at the principles and how they guide their methodology, their funding, and so on. And I think that's also an interesting initiative to look at. In relation to journalism and the quality of journalism and the ethics of journalism, I think, of course, we need a digital and a media literacy. I mentioned that as part of like the ideas for solutions. I do think that's a lot of the way to go. But of course, we need to think that we are in a transition. Legacy media is changing. Traditional journalism is changing a lot, given the impact of technology, and we are in this transition point, and we need to understand that that's where we are. There's a lot of confrontation as well between traditional legacy media and new media sources, new online sources. Just wanted to mention an initiative by the EU high-level group on fake news, because they are talking about indicators of quality, and that relates also to journalism. So what they are doing is these indicators of quality would be like to use reliable sources to qualify some of the online content. And I think that's an interesting idea, but of course, when we look at, there's also bias in regular media, in legacy media. How do we deal with that? But there is. It's coming. They will put it in force at the beginning of 2019, I think. So we'll have something there to observe and to monitor. The final part, just in relation to self-regulation, because when I was talking about self-regulation, I was talking about a mixed scheme of self-regulation. I was not talking about platforms just deciding among themselves what to do, but a multi-stakeholder scheme that would involve a broad definition, a broad dialogue, and to think of this regulation. So when I say self-regulation, I just wanted to highlight that I was mentioning before, like the idea of independence, of participation, and all that. So it's a qualified or a very specific type of self-regulation that I would be defending here.
Thank you. I would like to thank all the panelists. Thank you very much, and everybody in the room, because it seems that it was a great discussion.